4, 3, 2, 1. Let's go. Diary of a Kidney Warrior. Sharing faith, knowledge, hope, and love.
Hi, and welcome to Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast. My name is Dee Moore, and I am a Stage 4 Kidney Warrior. This podcast is dedicated to encourage, educate, and inspire as we explore all aspects of kidney disease, chronic illnesses, and health. If you have any questions or ideas for topics you would like me to cover, please do get in contact with me on social media using the handle Diary of a Kidney Warrior. In today's episode, we are talking about deceased organ donation. Joining me today is my guest, Lucy Dames, who is a specialist nurse in organ donation and currently working in London, England. We address common fears, debunk myths, discuss the importance of telling your loved ones your decision, and discuss the change in law regarding organ donation in the UK. Hi and welcome to Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast. How are you doing today, Lucy?
I'm good, thank you, Dee. Thank you for inviting me.
It's wonderful to have you, and I'm sure the listeners are going to learn so much from you today. I'm aware that there's different, or should I say, two categories, am I right in thinking, of organ donation, living donation and deceased donation?
Yep, that's right. So I work predominantly with deceased donations. So I look after patients at the end of their life who go on and donate organs. And there's equivalent nurses who specialise in living donations. So they look after people who have wanted to donate in life.
So when I think of, I must admit, when I think of donation, I kind of picture the scene that you would see in a medical drama like ER or Grey's Anatomy, where somebody's had like a serious accident and their medical team meet with the family and ask them. That's my kind of picture of the kind of organ donate.
How it works.
Yeah, organ donate. Is that the kind of thing I'm picturing?
So, well, I think the thing about Grey's Anatomy is the surgeons do everything in that show, so which is quite impressive in itself. But in terms of deceased organ donation, certainly in the UK, patients that come to us are patients who have had either very serious accidents or very serious brain hemorrhages, things like that, and they are on a ventilator. So they are patients who the medical team have done everything they can to try and save their lives, and then it's become evident that that's not going to be able to be possible. And unfortunately, these patients are now at the end of their life. And that is when we would then be told that there is a patient who may be a possible donor. And it's only then that we would check whether someone is actually registered to be a donor, whether they've made any decision to be a donor or not to be a donor. So when you first come into the hospital through the emergency department, the staff that are caring for you have no idea. Their priority is to save your life. And it's only when that's not possible and it's very evident that you're at the end of your life and you're on a ventilator that you would be referred to someone like me.
Okay, that's interesting, because I think that there might be some fear, I guess, for people who are reluctant to sign up to be a donor because they think, well, they're going to let me die or they're not going to fight for me. If I'm carrying this card, then they're going to just, oh dear, so-and-so, yeah, ship them off to be an organ donor. So it's interesting that you said that the medical team don't even know that you're an organ donor until it gets to that point.
Absolutely. I've heard that myself. I've heard people say that there's a genuine fear that actually you will be allowed to die if you are if you want to be a donor, because therefore, you've kind of, the doctors will give up on you because they want your organs, and that's absolutely not the case. It's very much the opposite, really. And as I say, the medical team, the nursing team in those environments, in the emergency department, in the critical care, they don't have access to the organ donor register. It's only specialist nurses in organ donation in England or in the UK that have that access and are able to get that information. And we don't know about these patients until they're at end of life. So that's a very understandable fear, but it's actually, it's not something that people need to worry about.
Okay. And so I understand that the law has changed around organ donation, and I've had people say to me, oh, does that mean that everybody's a donor and you have to opt out of donation? Like, how does this new law affect everyone? So in the UK, there's a few different laws because of the different countries of the UK. So in Wales and in England, we have a system of opt-out. So in England, that system came into place in May of this year, May 2020. And what that means in that system is that it works on the understanding that all adults have agreed to be organ donors in the event of their death, unless they've registered a decision not to be a donor. And there are certain exclusions to that. So, as I say, it has to be an adult. So that in England means someone over the age of 18. And it has to be people who have mental capacity. So it doesn't apply to anyone that has a lack of mental capacity, isn't able to understand the system, isn't able to make arrangements if they wanted to opt out. They don't understand how to do that. It doesn't apply to anyone that doesn't live in this country voluntarily. So, for example, if someone was posted here because of the military, it wouldn't apply to them, and lots of other groups. They have to have been living in England for a year or more, and a continuous period of a year or more. So there are safeguards in place, and they have to be people who are ordinarily resident, and they have to die in that country as well. So it wouldn't be the case that if you were Scottish and you lived in Scotland and then you crossed the border into England and then unfortunately had an accident and died, the law of England wouldn't apply to you because you don't live in this country. Does that make sense? Yes.
So there are several safeguards for this system, but ultimately the most important thing to state is really that everyone still has a decision and has a choice in the matter of whether they want to be a donor or not. The reason that the law was changed was to try and increase the number of people who could become donors. So we know that, as we've already said, there are lots of reasons why people may not choose to register to be a donor, whether that's fear, whether that's a sort of jinx effect, that they think that if they register to be a donor, they're going to get hit by a bus tomorrow. There's lots of reasons, but we know that if we were to say walk down the street and survey 10 people, 8 out of those 10 people would say they absolutely support organ donation, but perhaps only 3 of them would be registered donors. And it's that kind of middle ground of people that this system hopes to kind of increase the consent rate for. So, ultimately it's about saving more lives.
Absolutely. So in terms of, are there any other kind of exclusions? If you have, say, a certain medical condition, would you be excluded from being a donor as well?
So I think each patient who gets referred as a potential organ donor is assessed on a case-by-case basis. So there are some conditions currently that would stop you completely from being an organ donor, but they're very limited and they're constantly changing because of the advances in medical treatments. So, for example, several years ago, patients who were HIV positive couldn't become organ donors. And that's not necessarily the case anymore, because we know that there are patients on the transplant waiting list who are HIV positive. And we know that people live many long years perfectly healthy on medication with HIV. So things evolve and things change. So I think what I would say is that if you're worried about whether your own medical condition would preclude you from being an organ donor, don't, because that's for us to worry about if you were to be a potential donor. So there are certain cancers as well where you could still become a donor. So I think I've heard people say, oh, I couldn't be an organ donor because I have diabetes, or I couldn't be an organ donor because I have high blood pressure, or I like to have a drink. That's really not the case at all. There's very, very few conditions that would stop you.
And what organs can be donated?
So you can donate most of your organs, actually. So you can donate your heart, you can donate your lungs, you can donate your liver. And in some cases, the liver can be split. So it could be used for two people. It could be used for an adult and a child. You can donate, obviously, both of your kidneys. You can donate your pancreas. You can donate your small bowel. And in some cases, additional tissue around the bowel to help people who need bowel transplants. And then you can donate tissues in addition to organs. So you can donate your eyes, you can donate skin, you can donate bone, tendons, meniscus, lots and lots of things. And you're able to help a lot of people. So it really is a very special and unique thing to be able to do, because you can absolutely save so many people's lives and improve so many people's lives through donation.
So one person could save, say, how many people?
So with solid organ donation, we would say about up to 9 people could have their lives saved through organ donation, through solid organ donation. And with tissue donation, you could improve the lives of up to 50 different people. Wow. So it's absolutely incredible. It really is.
That's really amazing. 50. So, wow. So both potentially 59 people that you could help with that gift. That is amazing. Are there any other...
It's quite a legacy.
Are there any other myths that you would like to debunk about organ donation?
I think one of the common myths that comes up is people think that organ donation is against their religion. And we work with faith leaders from all of the major religions in the UK. And during the consultation period for the law change, the major faith leaders were all consulted about the law change in order that they could go back to their groups and confidently be reassured that all of their concerns have been addressed. And with organ donation, we know that there is no major religion that is opposed to organ donation. All religions believe that saving a life is a good thing to do. But it comes down to kind of individuals' own beliefs around how they interpret their faith. But we have a system now where if someone dies and they want their faith to be represented at the end of their life, which it always is anyway. We always, when we meet with donor families, speak to their loved ones about what faith they may have had or beliefs that they may have had, so that we can make sure that we address those needs at the end of their life. But there is the option now to register what's called a faith declaration on the organ donor register. And what that says is that your faith is important to you and that we must adhere to your faith in accordance with what is needed at end of life, as well as organ donation. So we have the ability to make sure that we get it absolutely right for everyone.
So what kind of thing would that include?
So, for example, there are certain faiths where they want a burial to happen quite quickly at the end of life, and some people believe that they must be buried within 24 hours. It's more of a guide than a finite time frame. But absolutely, if the families of our patients are concerned and want a quick burial, then we will work around those time constraints. So organ donation takes a little bit of time to set up because we have to coordinate getting all of the transplant patients ready for their transplants, and they may not be in their transplant hospitals. They may be at home and have to travel to those hospitals. So the logistics around organ donation is actually quite immense, and it's not something that takes days, but it can take several hours. And obviously, if a family are concerned about burial timeframes, then it might be that we limit the number of organs that a patient donates in order to expedite the process. So when families consent to organ donation, when the consent form is being completed, they can specify what organs they're comfortable with their loved one donating. So even if someone has said they're happy to donate everything, the family can be more specific and pick and choose. And we will talk around that.
Okay, so even though you're on the National Register and ultimately deemed, and if you haven't opted out, you've opted in, the family can the family still go against that and say they don't want you to be a donor at all?
Yeah, so ultimately we always speak to the next of kin of patients who are going or have the potential to become organ donors. And there's lots of reasons for that. So the process of organ donation is fully explained to patients' families at the end of their life if they have the potential to be a donor. And for some families, they don't wish to proceed for whatever reason, but we will sit down and we will spend time with them, or we will try and ascertain what their concerns might be or why they don't want donation to go ahead, especially in a situation where we know that that's what the patient wanted to have happen. So, if a patient has registered a decision to donate, so they've opted in, or they haven't opted out, so we're leaning towards the sort of side of them wanting to be a donor, we spend time with the family and we will address all of their concerns about the donation process that they may have, if any. And ultimately, if a family still does not want to go ahead with donation, then we won't go ahead because it has to be the right decision for them. So we always say, if you know you want to be a donor or you don't have an objection, then talk to your family about it, because ultimately your family have the final say.
Right. So rewinding slightly in what you said, so is there is there like an additional form that you can, so there's an assumption that everyone's a donor, but is there like an additional form that you can fill in to say, I really do want to be a donor?
Yeah, so the registration system in England and in the wider UK has the facility for everyone to register a known decision to donate. So to say that they definitely want to be a donor, and actually to specify then whether they have any restrictions they wish to place on that. So whether they want to say they want to be a donor, but they don't want to donate their heart, for example, or they don't want to donate their tissues. So if you visit the organ donation website in England, that's organdonation.nhs.uk, you can see those options available to you. The first page that you hit is register to be a donor or opt out of donation. And when you register to be a donor, you then, as I say, can specify what you're comfortable with donating. But even if you have registered to be a donor and you've made that decision and you've registered it, and you carry a donor card, ultimately your family can still overturn that decision, which is why it's really important to talk about it with your family so that they absolutely know. So we do meet with families sometimes who have had absolutely no idea that someone has done that. Someone has registered to be a donor and they've never told their family. And for some family, they find that very hard because they feel that their loved one told them everything, and they can't believe that they haven't told them something which is actually so important, and therefore they then question that. And ultimately, if they're personally uncomfortable with the idea of donation, it might be that they can't see through that because they've never had that conversation.
And then they then decline.
Yeah, and then they say no, and then that's doubly sad because the patient's decision hasn't been honoured, and that family may then regret that. They may, weeks and months down the line, when they're sort of through the acute stage of their grief, may reflect on that situation and think that actually they've made a mistake and they should have gone ahead with what their loved one wanted, and actually potentially other people have had to die unnecessarily.
All right. So it really is a case of, making that decision, and once you've made that decision, talking to your family, discussing it with them, and saying, if the worst does happen, this is what I really want to do, and I need you to understand this decision and respect it. So,
absolutely, I couldn't put it better myself. Exactly, and I think especially we're sort of coming towards Christmas time. Families are spending more time together. Obviously, we're currently in lockdown, so families are together at home. There's never a great time to have conversations about end of life, but actually it's far better to have had the conversation now than for your family to be in a really difficult decision when they're struggling anyway because of acute grief. And I think the other thing that's really important to say is that you're far more likely to ever be in a position where you need a transplant than to die in a situation where you could become an organ donor. There's very, very few people. It's about 1 in 100, if that die in a situation where they could even become an organ donor. And of those, they may still not be suitable. So it's very, very small numbers that are actually eligible to become organ donors in the first place, which is why every patient who has the potential to be an organ donor is absolutely precious.
Does anyone ever put it in their will that they want to be an organ donor? And if they put it in their will, does that make it absolute law and therefore can't be overturned by anyone else?
So people do put donation in their will, and I've heard of examples where I don't have a will myself, which is quite shocking, I suppose, really, working in my field of work. But I've got loved ones too, and I probably need to rectify that quite quickly. But I've had relatives who've said to me, they went to draw up their will and they were asked about organ donation, which is interesting that that's happening. But obviously part and parcel of writing a will is making those decisions and talking about your funeral arrangements. And so I suppose it does go hand in hand with organ donation, but the problem with putting it in your will and not doing anything else about it is that your will is often read quite a long time after you've died, and organ donation obviously is very time critical. So I have had the situation where I've had people contact me and say, my mum's just died and I've just read her will and she wanted to be an organ donor. And I said, okay, when did she die? Or she died 2 weeks ago. It's too late, unfortunately. It's too late. So it is really, really important that those decisions are made in life and those decisions are shared.
So what is the time scale like that the organs have to be? Is it harvested? Is that the word?
Harvested is very antiquated. So we say retrieved. Because I think the word harvest makes most medical professionals quite uncomfortable because we talk about harvesting crops and obviously organs are precious. So we say retrieved. So organ retrieval has to happen very soon after someone has died. So that's why patients who are eligible, to become organ donors are patients who usually have died on a ventilator, on a breathing machine, and they've had oxygen pumping around their body up until the point where their heart stops. And within a matter of minutes, minutes after someone's heart has stopped, organs have to be retrieved. And that's because as soon as a patient is dying and they don't have oxygen going around their body, those organs are dying as well. And those organs become unusable. So, for example, if a patient was to donate their heart, the minute that heart is taken out of the donor's body, it has to be transplanted within about 4 hours. And if it's gone on ice and it's taken to a transplant centre, it has to be transplanted within 4 hours. And other organs, have different sort of time frames. The kidneys are very resilient, so they last a bit longer, but we're still talking hours, not days. So the kind of classic, probably a lot of your listeners probably think the classic sort of organ donor is a young man who's kind of totaled his motorbike and he's died at the side of the road. They wouldn't be able to be organ donors because they've been dead, cold and dead for too long. They could donate tissue. So they could donate tissue like eyes, skin, heart, tissue, because the time frames involved in that are a little bit longer, but it's not weeks. It's still only a matter of hours and days, but it's a very short time frame.
Right. So yes, it definitely need to sit down with your family, your loved ones, friends, whoever it is that your next of kin is, and have that discussion. Death is a very difficult thing to talk about, but ultimately at one point in time we're all going to see death. So we need to be having these conversations and make sure that we make it clear what we want and make sure that our family will respect it, because up to 59 people can be saved by one person. That's 59 people's lives that are completely transformed.
Yeah, and I think, people sort of say, oh, well, they wouldn't want my organs or they wouldn't want my tissues. And, they're relatively young people. We consider patients able to donate up until their mid-80s.
Really?
We're not talking about just young people, and the majority of organ donors are patients around their sort of 60s. It's not the kind of very young person. Obviously, they do still become donors, but I've heard it said so many times. Oh, I'm far too old, or I like to have a beer, and it's just really not the case.
So in terms of donation itself, does the person have to be the same racial background, the same ethnicity of the person being transplanted to?
So they don't have to be, no. They don't even have to be the same sex, and they don't have to be the same age. But the chances of them being a good match are much better, much stronger if they are the same ethnicity. And that's because genetically your makeup is more similar for people in the same ethnic group as you. So it does matter. It does matter what ethnicity our donors are. And we do know that certainly in the UK, our Black and Asian and minority ethnic patients will wait longer for a transplant because of the fact that there are fewer donors from that population, unfortunately. So they will have a longer wait than a white patient waiting for a transplant. And that is purely on the fact that their tissue typing is not a stronger match.
So why do you think that Black and Asian people are not coming forward to be donors?
I think that's quite a complex question, to be honest. Obviously, I'm white. I'm white British, and I've been on a registered donor for a long time, and I'm Christian, and I believe that it's the right thing to do. I think, as I've said before, there are certain people who perhaps believe that their religion is a reason why they can't become a donor, and it might be that culturally, donation has a fear factor around it, or a lack of trust. We've already talked about the lack of trust, and that can come up quite regularly. I think that many of the families that I've met have just not thought it was a possibility, or perhaps funeral arrangements if sort of other members of the family live in other countries and they want that patient who's died's body to go back home, and they're concerned about sort of what family in their own country will think about that. All of those factors can compound that decision.
And how do you think that we can move forward in terms of, I mean, obviously today we're having this discussion and this is raising awareness for people of all communities. But what more do you think can be done to raise awareness within these communities to encourage people to come forward and to basically, what's the word I'm looking for? To address their concerns really, and to reassure people that it is okay?
I think it's really important that people share their decisions. As I say, I think word of mouth is really powerful, and actually, you know, especially with social media, people putting out their own decision and encouraging, you know, their family and their friends to do likewise, because affected. You know, I think there are probably many of your listeners who know people who are waiting for a transplant or have risk factors that might lead to them needing a transplant in the future. So they might have diabetes, or they might have high blood pressure, or they might have conditions where they're more likely to have issues that could lead to organ failure. And I think that, you know, it's really important that we are open and honest and we have these conversations. And I think the other thing is that people need to do their research. So if they have concerns about organ donation, then there's information out there. The NHS organ donation website has a huge amount of information, facts, figures. It's got lots of real life stories as well. So it's got lots of real life stories from patients who are families of donors from all ethnicities. And I think that's really powerful. That's really powerful because, as I say, I can sit here and I can say that, you know, everyone should be an organ donor. Absolutely, it's the right thing to do. But I don't represent all of your listeners. And I think that's what's really important, is that people who believe in organ donation and understand organ donation need to share that information and talk about it and be open and honest.
So you mentioned about case studies. So are those on the website?
Yeah. So there's a YouTube channel as well as an NHS organ donor YouTube channel. Lots and lots of different videos. So there's videos of donor families. There's videos of transplant patients. There's videos of healthcare professionals that work within transplantation or who work within hospitals that have come into contact with organ donation through whatever field that they work in. And they just talk about their experience. And it's all about demystifying it and providing the facts.
Fantastic. Is there anything final that you'd like to let our listeners know?
I think, as I say, I can't emphasize enough the importance to talk about it. I think, as I've said, you know, we all know we're going to die. That's an inevitability. And actually, many of us don't even know whether our relatives want to be buried or cremated. So, you know, we can't expect to know their organ donation decision unless we talk about it. And it is really important because it could save a life. And I think you have to think about, if you were in a situation where you were dying or your loved one was dying and somebody's organ could save them, you'd absolutely want to take that organ, I believe. And if you do feel that way, then you should be willing to give an organ as well.
Thank you. And what are the website address and the details?
Yep. So the website is www.organdonation, that's all one word, organdonation.nhs.uk.
And what's the YouTube channel?
It's just NHS Organ Donation. And there's also social media. There's an NHS organ donor website, a Facebook page, and a Twitter feed. There's lots of information out there.
Thank you very much. Thank you so
You're
much.
very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast. And don't forget that you can contact me on social media using the handle Diary of a Kidney Warrior. Please do subscribe to the podcast and please do tell a friend. New episodes of this podcast are released every Monday. Until next time, take care and choose to live.
Diary of a Kidney Warrior, sharing faith, knowledge, hope, and love.